So, all right, let's just go ahead and jump in to the Crypt's Ultimate Summon Necro. You can there, Crypt's Ultimate Summon Necro. Let's go.
Hey guys, how's it going? Kripparrian here. Today I bring you guys the long-awaited Necromancer Summoner Guide. Now, this is the build here in action. This is just from one of my streams. I think it's the last time I played the build. I'm like level 93. This is a tier 42. I'm just leveling, efficient nightmare sigils. The build is pretty good. It is a summoner build, and before we go any further,
My first impression on this is clearly he's doing a lot of the bone storm, like he just runs into rooms with the bone storm active. I'm surprised he's got it up so much. Like he's really like banking on that, which is great. I don't know which aspect. He's probably running some aspects that are doing the cooldown, or maybe he has items that are doing the cooldown. But also the main thing that I was surprised about when I looked at his action bar down here was the bone shards. I don't know what this basic skill is. Bone shards. I thought they were pretty weak, especially starting out. I could be wrong, so I'm really interested to see what that's going to be, or sort of why he includes that in his rotation. But otherwise, we've been doing most of the stuff that he has. Like there are corpse tendrils. This is obviously the skeleton skill. This is decrepify, bone storm, and golem. So we're pretty much on track with what he's doing. But I'm really interested to see what bone shards, where that comes in.
I want to mention that I think summoner builds for Necro can be competitive against everything other than like the immunity shadow mist thing. Basically, you can make a build that spams corpse explosion and is immune to damage almost all the time, and if there's enough monsters, all the time. Permanent
I haven't heard of that one. That sounds like an interesting build to check out.
immune builds, well, it's hard
Although it's not a, so a little bit less exciting.
to compete with those. But this build, I think, competes pretty well with the famed Bone Necro, the full Bone Spear Necro that does like, 5 to 10 million damage per Bone Spear. Now, this build is not going to do quite that amount of damage, but it's actually not too far off. And my
Good to hear.
version is still, level 93. I'm still missing, the perfect gear. I'm still missing some Paragon points. My glyphs are level 15. And still, I'm putting out like 12 to 15 minion volleys when I proc the Ring of Mendel, and I'll get into the strategy there.
That
Now,
is
working with
interesting to
minions
see what that
can
is.
be pretty annoying. You can even see here with the Butcher, he is just not cooperating. But the ring procced, and every single hit is going to do like millions of damage. It's not going to do a consistent.
I am happy to see that he's able to just stand there and sort of face tank. I mean, he is level 93, so that's been one of the biggest issues for minion builds, at least because that's the only build I've been really playing with. It's sort of tanking damage. You have to kind of run around all the time. You can't stand there, let stuff come at you. But and also I noticed he's using an iron golem. We were running an iron golem before, but basically all the minions or all the bad guys target you, and you kind of have to force it, finagle it to where they're attacking your minions. And so we've switched recently to bone golem, and that has been working a bit better because it has a taunt, so it sort of makes itself the target for a while. There is a long cooldown to that, so that can be kind of annoying. You just kind of have to gauge it, but it does seem to be a little bit more tanky than the build we had before. Yeah, I'm interested to see what he's doing to. I think the Iron Golem is probably superior to the Bone Golem, but because of the tanking factor, the taunt factor that it has, the Bone Golem has, it's a little superior for solo play, I feel like. But yeah, so I'm curious to see what he's talking about.
Amount of damage. And minions are pretty quirky in this game. I have a video describing the different minion interactions and how all that works. But I like minions. I think
Thanks for watching.
Diablo 4 does Necromancer justice, at least on a thematic level. If you like playing a minion master type of build, I think the feel for the class, the delivery of that experience is actually solid in Diablo 4. The
I
minions
agree with
have
that.
their own mind, but overall it has a certain level of harmony that just feels pretty good to play if you like that playstyle. And while I mentioned that the build is comparable to the Bone Spear build, I think it is, you know, 50 to 80% of the Bone Spear damage, but it's very inconsistent damage. Sometimes you have to be a bit patient because your minions, well, they're minions.
Yeah, one of the biggest factors with minion builds is that they follow you. So with any other build, you can just run into a room, start blasting minions. You kind of have to wait for them to catch up, and then aggro to bad guys that are already probably shooting at you or taking swipes at you. So I mean, he kind of makes up with that with the bone storm. So that's good to see. It's kind of teaching me how to be a better minion player, basically. But yeah, that is something. So it's a little frustrating that the build is a little slower. All right, it's probably a lot slower. Their builds. Yeah,
On the other hand, unlike the Bone Spear build, this build is insanely tanky. I managed to do, again, at level 93 or 94 or something, and, level 15 glyphs for the most part. Actually, it wasn't even like level 15 glyph. I'm using a level 7 glyph. It's not even active there. I did a rift that was, or a nightmare sigil that was 78. And it was Zenith, and it was terrible mods. Zenith is considered one of the worst ones to run if you
good to
are
know.
trying to push for high tier. I just put it in the crafting device, and I thought to try it, and I did it. First try. Killed the boss, made it work. So it is, without doubt, a very powerful build. Now, I will explain the build here. I actually don't have minions up because they got meteored in like a Helltide. I was doing the Helltide video before this one. But I can explain the build without them, and that's fine. Now, let's first get into the skills that we are using. So we are using raised skeletons, which means we're using both the warriors, we're using the reapers so we can get extra corpses. We're using the cold mages with the vulnerable effect. Now, if you have any form of spender, and there's many different ways where you can play this build, you can get the cold mages with the 2 essence. I recommend the cold mages over the bone mages because the bone mages are just going to constantly die. And right now, even though we're using the Shadow Blight passive, which should work with Shadow Mages, I am sure, 100% sure, that it does not work with your Shadow Mages. So either it is bugged.
That was one thing that I read recently was that a bunch of sort of combos that should work that don't seem to be working right now. But it's kind of, you have to be kind of careful with. There was another video I saw where I went into detail on minion damage and the stuff that's proccing on minions and stuff, and he had like the whole list laid out. And that was one thing that he was talking about was the shadow damage from shadow mages wasn't proccing with shadow blight, which kind of sucks. That was definitely something I had considered myself because it sounds like a cool kind of complement to each other. But and one other thing is definitely for the frost mages, the essence generation perk on them would be really great for like those builds that are like fear based or blight, throughout blight. Those take so much mana essence. That having them sort of have a little bit of a passive generation off the skeletons is really nice. But the vulnerability I think is even nicer. I switched recently to that myself, and much better improvement having vulnerability up. Like the downtime is much lower having them at a build. So it's good to see.
That it doesn't work with your Shadow Mages, or the guy who made the tooltip for the Shadow Blight Ultimate didn't get the memo that it's not supposed to work with the Shadow Mages. One of those things are happening.
Makes sense.
But until that gets fixed, cold is a clear winner, and we'll go into why. For the golem, we are using the iron golem with vulnerable, and vulnerable is really fantastic.
This is what we were
Just
using for a
higher
long time.
uptime.
Yeah.
Okay, we're using skeletons. We want to use the skeleton buff. It actually buffs the golem damage as well. We're using corpse tendrils level 9, 4.6 second cooldown, and we're using Decrepify to lower it even further. So we are just spamming corpse tendrils, and we're doing that because corpse tendrils has by far the highest lucky hit that is not bugged for Necromancer skills, and we'll go into that.
I didn't realize that. We've been basically doing that combo.
Staple. Bone Storm, we have 100% uptime on Bone Storm, even single target. We might not have 100% uptime on Bone Storm if we're running between packs, and then it's like very few mobs in between. But with just a little bit of Decrepify procs, you'll have 100% uptime on Bone Storm, which is insane. We'll go over that in a second.
Yeah, that's pretty
the Golem
powerful.
button, it's actually a pretty big smash. It hits most of the screen. It's a 3-second stun on a 10-second cooldown, but the cooldown is certainly not 10 seconds if you have cooldown reduction, which we have lots of, and we're using Bone Splinters. There are a few substitutions for Bone Splinters with this kind of build. I used Bone Spear because Bone Spear has an incredibly high lucky hit, but I hated not always being able to use it because it costs essence.
Yeah.
There is a Bone Prison version of the build. You also want to use the Aspect that makes it do damage, and the reason you want to do that is because Bone Prison with the Aspect has a guaranteed lucky hit proc. It's just like, it's like bugged or something. And because Lucky Hit equals damage for this build, it's a pretty good ability. Honestly, I hate Bone Prison so much, I'm still not using it. But there are
just thematically, I'm not a big fan of it.
For Bone Splinters.
It's cool, but
the build works. The build is entirely centered around the Ring of Mendel. If you do not have this ring, you do not want to...
Okay, so let's see. When you have 7 or more minions, you gain Lucky Hit up to 10% chance to empower all of your minions, causing the next attack from each to explode for 18,000. Assume that's a percent of what his is. But 18,000 physical damage. That's insane. Looks like he has 2 of them. Okay. So basically you're banking on lucky hits. I believe only you can get lucky hits. Again, from the video I watched earlier on Minion mechanics, basically, they don't have any lucky hit. I'm recalling correctly now, but that was my understanding. They do not have any lucky.
To play this build yet. You can play a generic summoner build.
Sorry,
you do around the... I'll explain how the build works. The build is entirely centered around the Ring of Mendel. If you do not have this ring, you do not want to play this build yet. You can play a generic summoner build, which is pretty decent. I made a highlight before the game came out even, and made a build guide for the Blizzard Cold Mages, and actually that build has held up pretty well.
That's what we were running
Blizzard
before.
Cold Mages will get you to endgame. They'll get you to level 100 if you're unlucky enough to never see a Ring of Mendel. Personally, I've found 2 of these by level 90, so they are rare, but they're not super rare. The damage of the proc is based on the item level of the ring, so you're really just trying to find a higher item level of the ring. If you're playing a summoner that is not a Ring of Mendel summoner, you never want to use one-handed weapons. However,
that's what we've
use
been
about
running.
half your damage not using a two-hander, because minions have a set attack speed. So if you use a higher weapon speed, you actually just lower their damage because the weapons are based around balancing of DPS. This changes entirely when you get the ring. Lucky Hit up to 10% chance to empower all of your minions, and we have a maximum of 12 minions, causing their next attack from each to explode for 18,000 physical damage.
That's really good.
This is the base damage. It can be difficult to wrap your mind around how much damage this is, but let's talk about it. So you get 12 of those. What does that mean? Well, it's about 220,000 in my case. What does that mean? Well, that's a good question. If you look at like a weapon, if you have like a two-hander, if you have a slow two-hander, like 800 item power, similar to that ring, it's going to do, if it's a scythe, about 3,500 base damage. And that base damage gets modified by all your stuff, the modifier of your skill, the crit, all the other things that stack up. So minions don't scale quite as well as other things. They only get 30% of your crit chance. They only get 30% of your attack speed, your thorns. I think they get most of the rest of the stuff. But when we're talking about an effective base hit of 220,000 versus a two-handed slow scythe for a Necromancer starting at 3,500, we don't really have to use our imagination too much to realize that this ring is absolutely insane. Now, there are some scaling issues because the core Necromancer damage scaling mechanics actually come from sacrificing your minions. And you basically lose all of that. And the reason you lose all of that is, even though this is base damage, you lose all of that because you have to use all your minions. You have to use all your minions because of Cult Leader, which gives your minions effectively 45% more damage. I actually think it stacks multiplicative, so about 50% more damage if you have all three. And because that modifier applies on the ring, well, you're going to want to have that. The idea is that we have minions, we make them tanky so they're not dying, so we always have 7 or more, and we get lucky hit on as much stuff as we can, and we use skills with very, very high lucky hit. So when we go back to the skills that I talked about, the best skill for lucky hit is Corpse Tendrils. I don't know exactly how it works. Corpse Tendrils goes on a corpse, it like pulls all the mobs in, it stuns them, makes them vulnerable if you have it spec'd, and I do have it spec'd. And it has a lucky hit chance per mob hit. In my experience, if you hit like 7 to 10 monsters, it will proc your ring. Now, this is kind of interesting.
Corpse Tendrils is so nice. I really like that skill.
Extremely reliable. I think it might not be RNG. It might be a case where if you have a total of 1,000 lucky hit in a skill, it just guaranteed procs it. It might be something like that.
There's a lot of
I think
abilities
that Corpse Tendrils works in a way where the pull-in, perhaps the stun, and perhaps even the vulnerable are separate hit triggers. So the lucky hit is just completely insane. Now it has a cooldown, which is why you're going to want to have a lot of skills and cooldown reduction and all the rest. And that makes it not the highest uptime. But when it comes to clearing dungeons, well, you Corpse Tendrils, the ring procs, every mob goes in the same spot, the ring is AoE damage, everything's dead. Okay, so it is a very
that makes a lot of sense.
Playstyle. It is a very powerful build.
That's kind of the direction I was trying to move in with my stuff. I was using and he's got Bone Spear here, or Bone Shards here, but we've been using Corpse Explosion to sort of pull everything together with Corpse Tendrils, make sure it's all cursed, and then Corpse Explode on it a bunch. This is almost a little bit more of a passive way, I feel like, because you're able to just Corpse Tendril, and then again he gets all those procs, and it's like sort of explosion. So that's really cool. It's really cool to see that. Yeah.
For the other main triggers, we have Bone Storm. It doesn't trigger all that much. Bone Storm is a negligible chance with lucky hit because it is for the entire duration of the Bone Storm, and in my case, I think it's like 18 seconds. You'll get a few procs with Bone Storm, but don't count on it. Bone Splinters is actually pretty good. It is the lucky hit chance per Bone Splinter, and with the, I believe, first upgrade, 25% chance to fire 2 additional. So that's like you get half a splinter. So it's like 3.5 splinters, and each one has its own lucky hit chance. And quite importantly, if you hit the same target with 3, you get 8 crit chance for 4 seconds. And I want to mention that it feels like, to me, that buff-based crit and attack speed modifiers actually work at least to a higher degree on the minions. Like if I get 8 crit on my gear, my minions are not really critting much more because you only get 30% of it. But when it comes to buffs, and this is a buff, okay, this will show up like on your bar here, I believe they might get either the full amount or a higher percentage. Again, that's just a feeling. I could be wrong about that.
That's really interesting insight.
But it certainly seems that way from my experience. So I like Bone Splinters. Bone Splinters is only going to hit 1 target.
That would make sort of... I've been focusing on dexterity boosting items because I was like, okay, well, my crit chance, passes on to my minions, and 30% of it. So if I'm at like 10%, then they have a 3% chance to crit, which is not a lot. And so to hear his sort of insight, and this is not verified, but it's a good sort of that instinct. I think that's something to sort of rely more on. So that would be pretty pretty great. It'd be a good game changer, I think.
Now, Bone Spear is going to hit all the targets, and Bone Spear has a ridiculous lucky hit. Bone Spear is a much better skill to use if you're dealing with lots of monsters, but when you're dealing with like a level 9 corpse tendrils that you can spam every like second or two because you have such reduction from Decrepify, the Decrepify lucky hit reduced your cooldowns from your minions hitting. That lucky hit that you have is passed on to your minions. So the cooldown reduction of this build is unbelievable. So you can just spam corpse tendrils like crazy as long as you have a corpse. So in my experience, when you have a really low cooldown corpse tendrils and tons of lucky hit, you don't really need to use Bone Spear anymore, because if there's a lot of mobs, they're just all going to die. So for single target, I like Bone Splinters more than Bone Spear. That's why I'm using Bone Splinters over Bone Spear. But again, there are other options. You can use Bone Prison, but you have to use the aspect, which means you're going to want to lose the 25 damage multiplier when you have a barrier. That's a pretty sizable multiplier though, so not sure I like that. I also am quite positive that the Bone Prison interaction is bugged, because it is triggering every single lucky hit of any single skill. It has like 1,000 lucky hit chance or something. I don't know how it works. For the rest of the gear, we're looking for cooldown reduction, armor aspect on the helmet, extra skeletons on the chest, just defensive stats on the chest. The gloves, I really, really suggest that you get lucky hit, attack speed second, crit third. Oh, I forgot. Lucky hit chance while you have a barrier is a modifier that shows up only on a Sorc. So if you find a helm that you like with one stat that you can reroll, you can move the item on a Sorc mule and roll it there to get lucky hit chance. You cannot otherwise get lucky hit on a helmet.
Good to know. That's gamifying.
For pants, again, just defensive stats. If you want to get like maximum minion life, that actually does help your survivability, because if your minions are not dead, you're going to be taking way less damage because you're getting hit a lot less. For boots, you want to get the damage reduction while injured. That's huge. That's obviously passed on to your minions. Dodge is actually quite good on Necro, because there's twofold.
I didn't realize damage reduction was passed to you. I mean, makes sense, but I honestly didn't. Good insight for me.
You have no resistance against crowd control other than the topazes in your gear, which will give you about 40-something% damage reduction. So you take like half damage when you're CC'd. Very good. But dodge will, on one hand, prevent you from getting CC'd at all in some cases. And if you have, like, again, 12 minions, if you have like a 15% chance to dodge, and the monsters, are like doing freezing hits, if one or two aren't frozen because they're dodging those hits, that can give you...
I didn't think about dodge either. Wow, that's crazy. Like, movement speed, I knew, but okay, that's there's so many things to account
for. A lot of punch, a lot of impact in that round of combat. So I actually quite like dodge. It's not real damage reduction, but it is realer than you think when you're playing a minion build. Plus corpse tendrils is good. You can also get like int. I do like the high skill corpse tendril gameplay. I do recommend that. Dodge also has the added benefit when you're going against crazy content, because your minions are taking a maximum of 30% of their total life. In some cases, they are always going to be taking 30% of their life. So something like 10% damage reduction, they might still be taking 30% of their life. But the dodge is going to help. So it is a bit of a different defensive dynamic when you consider that your minions are getting some of your defenses. For the amulet, we really want to get cooldown reduction. I would not compromise on cooldown reduction. And the second best stat for damage is Hellbent Commander. The playstyle of this build is melee when you want it, and ranged when you need it to be. Hellbent Commander gives you a multiplier effect to your minions' damage if you're close to them. If it's easy content, you run through, you're going to apply this bonus to your melee skeletons and your golem, and maybe a few mages that straggle. And if you can't be close at all to your targets, it's still going to hit a few of your skeleton mages, in some cases all of them. So it is an incredibly powerful passive. Not all passives can show up as plus stats on an amulet. There's only a select few, and for minion builds, I believe this is the best one. After that, armor, movement speed. I think you can even get lucky hit while barrier from like a Sorc. There's other options, but those are really the two core stats. For your ring, you need to have vulnerable damage, you need to have lucky hit, you need to have life. The last stat can be critical strike damage, or it can be critical strike chance. You actually have tons of crit damage from the Paragon tree, which we'll get into in a second. The ring, obviously. Before I forget, the amulet has the corpse tendril aspect. It gives you 30% crit chance. This is the majority of your crit chance, and it is a 90 multiplier of your critical damage. This is not 90 crit multi. This effectively nearly doubles the damage of your critical hits. And in my case, my critical damage is...
That's just quick. You deal 90% bonus critical strike damage to enemies damaged by corpse. Wow, that's really good buff. Or debuff, I guess, to the enemy. I didn't... Oh, okay. We'll have to definitely look at
critical hits. And in my case, my critical damage is 194, so I do about triple damage when I crit. Well, with that aspect up, and it's up all the time because I use corpse tendrils certainly faster than every 6 seconds, it almost doubles that. So when I do a crit, I do about 6 times normal damage, which, given that damage is a premium in Diablo 4, that is pretty nuts. We also have you deal a little bit more than double damage for 6 seconds after the Shadow Blight key passive damages enemies 10 times. So you might be thinking that it might be weird that we're playing a minion build with lots of minions and we're not taking the attack speed ultimate passive. The reason we're not doing that is because it's bad. Its uptime, if you're playing quickly, is effectively none. Right.
Yeah, since you're running into rooms and you're
it is
getting
actually
hit.
that bad. You might as well get like some extra health at that point, seriously. But Shadow Blight is quite interesting.
I hadn't thought about, so I've taken the Callan's Edict every time because I'm like, well, of course I want attack speed. Like, why wouldn't you want that? But the idea that, you know, you haven't taken damage in 3 seconds, once you take damage, that's gone. So it's just like, I knew it was sort of a risk reward kind of situation, but you know, I didn't realize, or I didn't think about the fact that, you know, we're going to be running into rooms, you know, probably taking damage. We'll lose that for at least the first, you know, 3 seconds of a battle, since you're the first one in. I usually like run into a room and then I'll have to dodge back out as my minions like sort of cover me, which sucks. But this seems like a more, just from the gameplay we saw earlier, this seems like a more aggressive gameplay, which is what I've been looking for. I've been really looking for something that's a little bit faster, that I don't have to just like stand there awkwardly while my minions sort of, you know, take down the bad guys slowly but surely. So this is a really good insights.
Yes, it is actually that bad. You might as well get like some extra health at that point, seriously. But Shadow Blight is quite interesting. We can deal lots of instances of Shadow Blight stacks. So Shadow Blight applies all damage taken. So we do shadow damage to the target, it gets Shadow Blight for 2 seconds, it takes 10% more damage from me and my minions. Doesn't matter what damage type they do, all the damage. Very good. And every 10th time we do shadow damage, you do a little bit more shadow damage. And every 10 times this happens, we do more than double damage for 6 seconds. You might be thinking, how often does that happen? Well, against single target, its uptime is not super great, but it's not bad. I'll explain this interaction in a second. Let's just go to the last item. So this item is a very specific offhand that drops off of a rare monster. Her name is Princess Keen. and she spawns as a neutral. You see this cup here? It's to the right of Gaekul, near the altar of Lilith. So right in the middle of this cup, she is an NPC. You talk to her, she gets annoyed, turns into a succubus, tries to kill you. She spawns like between 10 seconds and 5 minutes. She always drops an offhand. Sometimes it's sacred, sometimes it's ancestral. It has 3 stats, and it can have an item level of 850. I've never had one over 830 myself. It always has lucky hit. It always has some other stat that I reroll into cooldown reduction. I forget what it is. And it always has crowd control duration. So let's talk about those stats. Crowd control duration, well, that's really good. It actually works on your mages. If you go to your Book of the Dead and you do skeleton mages, you can see that. Where is it here? Is it the skeleton mages? I think it is. Oh yes, it's the shadow mages, the stun. The stun goes up. So I believe that the chill duration will go up and the freeze duration will go up on the cold mages. But it seems to work on the skeletons. It does not improve the golem tooltip. So you can use your imagination. Maybe it works with golem stuns. Maybe it does not. But I think it's a really good
so
stat.
Frustrating how
we can stack.
So frustrating how so much is just not documented for us, like in game, you know, or the tooltips are missing or labeled, or descriptions are wrong or off. For something that's like, you know, you invest a lot of time to rank up, and then you have to spend currency essentially to respec if it's not working or something. It's a little frustrating. I mean, we can respec, so that's a nice deal, but at the same time, being sort of in this gray zone of not knowing things are working or not, just, well, wasting a lot of time, basically. Trial and error, or, you know, going out and researching like what we're doing right now. Researching is it's a little annoying. It's a little annoying.
Stagger bosses pretty effectively with this build. We also get stun procs from the Decrepify Curse, which is also based on Lucky Hit, which we were stacking a lot of. The second stat, I forget what it is. I don't really care. We roll to cooldown reduction, and it's really easy to get a perfect roll because items that are set drops, and this is a set drop, not a set item, it just always drops off the rare mob. They vendor for like 2 gold, and because the reroll cost is based on the sell value of the item, so don't put your legendary aspect on it before you reroll it, it actually costs like almost no money to roll constantly, but you will need the Forgotten Souls. You have to do a lot of Helltide. Video on that, by the way. Make sure you check that out. And the other stat is the lucky hit chance. And you might be thinking, hey, Krip, this item only has 3 stats. Why is he going to own it with 3 stats? Well, lucky hit chance on an offhand is actually capping at 6%, and it goes to 9 if you have 5 upgrades. So in this case, 16.5%, it's nearly a double roll of lucky hit. Lucky hit for us is the best stat, other than cooldown reduction, which you kind of need. So it's an item that has 2 lucky hit rolls, a perfect cooldown reduction roll, and a 4th stat, which is not bad. This is basically a best in slot offhand. If you get the absolute perfect offhand that isn't this one, with like perfect rolls, with crazy item level, maybe. But if you're playing at that level, you kind of know how to play your character already, so that's fine. So that's a really good offhand. To reiterate, the topazes, the damage reduction from while crowd controlled impaired, you need topazes in your armor. This is massive minion survivability. Let's talk about Bone Storm.
Oh, that applies to minions. I didn't even realize that.
The main reason why we use Bone Storm is because we can use the aspect that turns it into a shadow damage skill, and it also gives it a damage over time component. Now, this looks really bad, but it's
honestly, I've been looking for it, so
completely crazy. Bone Storm, when you cast it, is not only cast on you, but it's also cast on your golem. The golem's version will also gain all of the effects and count as your damage. You are just casting Bone Storm on the golem and yourself. So this
I knew it casted on him, but I didn't know it was your damage. I thought it might. So really good to hear.
Doing, instead of I think it's 1 hit per monster per second, it's doing 2 hits because you're using a golem, but each of those 2 hits is doing the hit, which is shadow, and then damage over time over 2 seconds, and damage over time happens twice a second. So it's doing 5 hits from you and 5 hits from the golem. So this aspect turns Bone Storm from a 2 hit per second skill into a 10 hit per second skill that also now does shadow damage. So this is how we stack Shadow Blight. So we are doing 10 hits per second, I guess effectively 11 hits per second because we're getting the trigger of the Shadow Blight per target per second. Okay. Also, let's just not forget that Bone Storm does pretty reasonable damage. It gives you damage reduction, which is passed on to all of your minions, and it gives you 20% critical chance and is a buff. So again, I think this might go into your minions in full.
That's fantastic. I didn't think that was working that.
And because we're doing tons of shadow damage, tons of instances of shadow damage, we are able to use the Shadow Blight aspect, which has extremely good uptime. If you engage a large pack of mobs, it'll proc immediately. And you'll just kill them immediately. And then you move on to the next pack of mobs, it'll proc immediately, you kill them immediately. Single target, it is a bit random because your procs might not come right away. But single target minion builds, actually, it's their strength. Minions just attack single target in general. So minion builds are not really weak single target to begin with. You don't really have much to worry about. This will just help your clear significantly. We are also using 2 other aspects for Bone Storm, but let's call it 3 other aspects. The main thing that this build does much better than the Bone Spear build, other than having minions for defenses, other than having a lot of defenses, other than having cooldown reduction, other than having Bone Storm up 100% of the time, we're just hitting many times all the time. So the armor aspect, and we know how powerful armor is going to be up at 100 stacks with high regularity. So we are going to have lots of armor on this character. We have 9,000 base armor right now. And again, I'm level 94, and I am missing some armor from the passive tree and some glyphs that scale it. We are also using each time Bone Storm damages an enemy, gain a barrier equal to 5% of your base life for 10 seconds. So again, this counts your golem, and it is each time Bone Storm damages an enemy. Well, with the gloves, we're damaging an enemy 5 times per second for each of the 2 Bone Storms. So we're actually getting 50% of our life as a barrier every second per nearby enemy. Even though I was able to do like a Nightmare Sigil, like almost level 80 and a really bad one, not even polished character at this point, yes, in that case, I was getting nearly one-shotted by a lot of stuff. I couldn't really be in melee. But when I was doing Nightmare Sigils 50, which is still considered very high by most standards right now, this character is completely invincible. The high damage reduction and the
That's what we're looking for.
That I have a lot of armor, the fact that I always have the armor aspect, and the fact that my minions are taking a lot of damage instances for me, coupled with the fact that I'm getting 50% barrier per second, actually it's like 60 because I have barrier generation, per second per enemy, my character, the life never goes down. Never. A mob has to hit me for like over half of my health to even do any damage. There's another aspect to this. We can use Bone Storm consumes up to 8 additional corpses to increase your damage by 8 seconds. Increase duration by 8 seconds. So it's not a 10-second Bone Storm, it is an 18-second Bone Storm. I also want to point out that with the Paragon passive for corpse consumption that gives you damage, which is...
I am so lost with the Paragon stuff. I need to really
not that one.
study. I mean, this is a whole
consuming 5
map.
Corpses grants 40% increased damage.
Literally a map. I mean,
seconds.
it's Paragon.
Multiplier.
Or map, so it makes sense.
This is like 1 trigger per cast. If you use like something that uses multiple corpses all at once, it'll still only give you 1 stack. But with this Bone Storm legendary aspect, each time it consumes a corpse, and it can do this after you've already cast Bone Storm. So you're just walking around, just corpse there, corpse there. It counts individual corpses, so you can actually get
that's why he has
going, that damage buff going right away.
So
the play style can be a little bit clunky because you typically want to corpse tendrils and then put up your bone storm. But if you have low enough cooldown reduction, you're just always going to have a corpse for corpse tendril, and you're always going to have bone storm up, overlapping cooldowns. And that's why we use the increased damage when you have a barrier, because we can have a barrier all of the time. There's a lot of components that come together for this character, but overall the character is extremely effective. Want to quickly go over the different skills. I think once you understand the combos and the gear for this character and the idea, all the skills make sense. So it'll be pretty obvious stuff. We get Bone Splinters because it's my lucky hit for single target of choice for activator. We get Hewed Flesh. Lucky hit spawns a corpse. Spawning a corpse is extremely important because it propels the smoothness of the character. Extra corpses for single target sometimes are needed when we want to refresh Bone Storm. You need 3 points in this, and we're scaling Lucky Hit like crazy, possibly higher than any other build in the game. So that 12% goes a long way. Damage and health for warriors. You want to get 3 Grim Harvest if you're actually using a spender, like if you're using Bone Spear instead of Bone Splinters. But Fueled by Death does work on your minions. It is tooltip damage.
Wow,
Decrepify only needs 1 point, but with the Splinters version, we have a free skill point. Amplify damage, I've personally tested. It does work on your minion damage. You need to test some things with minions, I guess.
I thought this was, since it says damage from you, like I thought that was straight up your damage, so then only 30% of that would go to your. Well, that's kind of a waste of points if we're trying to buff minions. But to hear that, you know, and tested it clearly that it works for minions, like straight buff to minions. I mean, I gotta take that. So I'm gonna be going back to the drawing board on the whole build. Once again,
close enemies, more damage from you. I don't know if the more damage from you works because I don't care. I would still get it for the 9% less damage taken.
Yeah, that's a nice.
Skeleton Mage Mastery, obvious choice. We use Reaper's Pursuit because we want 15 movement speed. I believe your minions inherit your movement speed, and your Bone Storm does shadow damage all the time, in fact. So 15 movement speed is fantastic. I don't think the stun is worth it, but it's not terrible. Once they make Shadow Mages not bugged, we might consider getting Gloom and Terror. But in the meantime, just the Bone Storm damage is not justified to get those passives. Corpse Tendrils with the Vulnerable. Maximum points for lowest cooldown.
I didn't realize the cooldown
Carapace actually gives a permanent Fortify. Yeah. Fortify has extremely high uptime with 3 points and moderate uptime with even 1 point because we are consuming lots of corpses. Bone Storm, of course. All the minion passives, of course. And the Golem nodes, of course. We use Shadow Blight, as I mentioned. It is far better than nothing. And, I mean, you can play with 10 life. It's probably not even that bad. For Paragons...
I'm surprised he didn't go Ossified Essence right there. The bone skills deal 1% increased damage for each point of essence you have above 50 on cast. I mean, if we're running a pretty low essence consumption build, then you have pretty much a 50%, you know, assuming you have only an essence, you'd have a 50% increase to the damage from Bone Storm or even the Bone Shards. Maybe doesn't scale that much, and we're really only using Bone Storm for the passives, the lucky hit and passives, damage reduction, the crit chance buffs. Maybe that's why he's not taking that. But I mean, because otherwise we don't have a lot of shadow damage other than the Bone Storm. So yeah, just an interesting.
You can play with 10 life. It's probably not even that bad. For Paragons, I have min-maxed Paragons like crazy. You will have a link for Paragons. We're going to get some life later, but again, I'm not level 100 on this character, so keep that in mind. We use the Control Glyph. It's pretty obvious that the Control Glyph works with your minions. It will be a noticeable impact as you're leveling it. You and your minions deal 10% damage to slowed or chilled enemies. Usually, in these cases, you get both of those effects, so the Glyph of Control is enormously significant. You get the slow effect from Decrepify, and because you use the Cold Mages, they chill every hit. So you actually get 10% and 10% again to everything except bosses. But bosses, you don't have to worry about those. Playing a Minion Mancer. 20% multiplier to stunned. You're stunning constantly with corpse tendrils. And to frozen. Frozen doesn't happen all that often, but against rare mobs, if it's like a really tanky rare, it does happen because you have lots of skeleton mages that do cold damage. The next thing I recommend is get Cult Leader. Cult Leader is insanely strong. Some people said that it doesn't work. I've personally tested it. It does work.
Good. Glad to hear that.
I use Dead Razor here. I think it's a superb glyph, but mostly for the damage reduction. Look at that. 10, 10, 10, 40 damage reduction for your minions. This is going to make your minions really, really tanky along with the armor. And speaking of armor, we're getting every single armor node on the skill tree except for one. I will make a note that I believe that minion damage is not doing anything for your character. It is a little anecdotal, but I got this glyph going first to activate the damage reduction, and my damage really wasn't going up. And this is at a point in the game where I had no additive damage, so my damage should have gone up significantly. I don't believe it did. And then after that glyph, I leveled Glyph of Control, and the Glyph of Control made me gain damage significant with every single 5 int node I was picking up. So, yeah. Skeleton Mage damage I think works. We actually mostly get these for the Skeleton Mage resists, because I don't know if they have very much of them. Makes them a little bit tanky, a little bit more damage. Not a super high priority one. Armor. Blue big armor nodes because we are using Amplify. So it's a multiplier damage against curse targets. We want to be cursing anything worthwhile. A lot of mobs are just going to die instantly, so it doesn't really matter. Scent of Death is quite nice. Damage reduction or additional damage. We get lots of critical strike damage on the passive tree. This is actually one of the big strengths for Necromancer. Necromancer has a fantastic Paragon tree for minions. There's not a lot of other things that work very well for minions, but the Paragon tree, beautiful. Crit damage, damage to injured. The corpse thing does work with your minions. We use the exploit glyph. I'm going to be getting that. Actually, I'll probably move those 2 points over. But there are options here. We get a few more dex nodes for vuln damage. Look at this. So many legendary modes. Golem, 50 damage, 50 health. Even in Nightmare Sigil 80, in a really bad one, when all of my minions were dying constantly, the Golem was taking hits. Just barely, but it was. It very rarely died. Actually, I'm not sure it did die, but, you know, its health was moving. So Hulking Monstrosity is very, very nice. Any kind of minion damage or specific minion damage will multiply the damage of the proc that minion does. So our Golem is our hardest hitting minion, and he will do the biggest procs. And that's pretty good because the Golem is the one minion.
You know, when I first started playing, I was like, okay, I'm not gonna have any Golem. Like, I wasn't a really big fan of Golems, you know, going back all the way to Diablo 2, but they've really grown on me. Playing Diablo 4, almost like a must-have for a minion build, or even just like honestly, just having it there, have any skeletons or anything like that. I would say, you know, it's a necessary sort of buddy, especially if you're using like a Bone Storm, because again, you have the two, you have the Bone Storm on you, and you have the Bone Storm on him, and it's so nice. It's so nice, and they're just such nice tools too. Like either, you know, smash to make stuff vulnerable, or the taunt. It's such a ease of life. Makes your life so much easier. Whatever you want to term it.
You can control on a Minion Mancer. I also can get percent armor while you have a Golem active. Those are pretty cool nodes. And these nodes kind of suck, but it's actually very efficient for territorial. Look at that. We just go up a little bit and a little bit there, and we get the glyph fully active with 29 dexterity. So I've found that Necromancer, unlike a lot of the other classes, has massive power from Paragons because so many legendary nodes. Look at that. We get the legendary node on every single board, and the efficiency around the glyph socket is extreme on every single board. So Necromancer is quite cool in that regard, and it's an identity to the class that I think not a lot of people will realize, but you know what? I min-maxed it for you, So enjoy the goods. And
Appreciate
as
that.
always, if you
Appreciate
want
that.
the written form of this guide, if you want to see the details of it, I will include a link below to the Mobalytics guide where you can bring it up time and time again and compare it with your character if you choose to roll your very own Minionmancer. Good luck finding those rings, and until you do, happy blizzarding.
Cool. That was great to see.